Hello, everyone. This is Morgan Boykin again with SC Codes. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our webinar week. We're really excited to bring you Paul Allen today for AC interview. He is going to help you pack your toolkit full of tips and tricks and resources to help you prepare for the interview and stand out in the crowd when it comes to tech interviews. For those of you who are new to SC Codes, I am Morgan Boykin, and I am our community and volunteer coordinator. So I have a chance to work with our volunteers as well as our learners who are out on the platform. SC Codes is a totally free platform and resource for residents in South Carolina to learn coding skills. In addition to learning the actual skills, we pair you with mentors and provide opportunities like these for you to get in-depth tips and tricks and tools to help you in the industry. So we are totally free. We would love for you to learn more about SC Codes. If you don't have that in your pocket already, you can go to our website at sccodes.org as well as hang out here after our webinar, and I'd be happy to chat with you more about how we work. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul Allen. Again, you guys are in for a real treat. And those of you who joined our Mentor Mondays, which you should be tuning into every Monday, where we highlight volunteers in our program, you know Paul. He had a wonderful, wonderful Mentor Monday segment with us, and we had to bring him back to tap into his knowledge a little bit more. So he is a lifelong student of technology, a lover of all things peanut butter, aren't we all? He currently works at Red Ventures, where he leads a team of engineers who operate across the whole stack and use technologies like Node, TypeScript, Go, React, and many others. He actually has a career, or came from a career in banking, and is self-taught in code, where he's learned everything from experience, passion, and lots of experimenting. Paul and his wife live in Colombia, where they enjoy watching The Amazing Race while awaiting their next adventure. So we are so excited to have him here today. Our flow for this evening is we're going to dive into a little bit more information with Paul, and then have a chance for some Q&A. Those of you who submitted questions, we have those on deck, and we'll be getting to those towards the end of our webinar as well. But feel free to throw some questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll be happy to get with those towards the end. So thank you again for joining us this evening. I look forward to talking more with you in other webinar weeks that we have coming up. I look forward to sharing more about SC Codes with you, and I will turn it away to our awesome guest presenter this evening, Paul Allen.
All right. Thank you, Morgan. It's good to be back again. And so let's do some fun live sharing here. Always nothing gets the heart pumping. And Morgan, if you'll give me a thumbs up that looks good, everyone's seeing that. We'll present this out. All right. So I just wanted to give, talking about like acing the tech interview or just interviewing in general. And so I kind of wanted to give just some advice from a fellow engineer. And as a sub point of that, like I want to, tell everybody, like, you are an engineer or you are a developer, like that having the job doesn't make you that. And so like, I think of everybody as fellow engineers or people that are interested in this field. And so, when we talk about those things, and I don't think about how do I become one, like if you're getting into this and doing these things, like just having the job doesn't make you an engineer, solving the problems in there makes you one. So these are some pieces of advice from me, a fellow engineer. And as Morgan said, who I am, I work for Red Ventures, and I lead product engineering for one of our verticals at Red Ventures. And so we have a bunch of different products that my teams build. And I've been dabbling in tech for most of my life, but I got really serious as a hobby in 2009. And like Morgan said, my initial career was in banking, but I made a full career switch back in 2018. So kind of went from having one career that, had a whole different interview process and then getting into tech, and now that has kind of like a few oddities that make it, different when it comes to interviewing. Big passion. My big focus for me is application and web engineering when it comes. And right now, my preferred stack is Node, TypeScript, and React. But I've built projects in a bunch of other languages as well. And we'll have time, like throughout this this time, like go ahead and be thinking of questions or a question you want to ask. Feel free to throw it in the chat. And I definitely want to. I've got a couple of high-level pieces of advice, but I really want to make sure I save time to answer the questions that y'all have and make it what it is for y'all. So big disclaimer before I start, and I think this is really important to state, like every company's different, and people have, like, each person and job and company and situation is different, right? So there's no like one magic bullet, like if you do these 5 things, you get a job or you pass the interview. In fact, some people in some interviews may say, well, this is great. And the exact same interview, someone may say, well, I don't know, that's not that great. So that's just a big caveat here, is that there's a range of opinions. And kind of some of the advice points that I want to talk about tonight is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's a good place to start. And then generally they're pretty good places to go. So kind of in thinking about the tech interview, there's a couple of different parts, right? So there's before the interview, right? Before you get there. So the first piece of advice is don't disqualify yourself. I see this a lot with people getting into the tech space. And even if you're in the tech space, a lot of people will just look at a job and they're like, they probably would tell me no, or they'll probably not take me, or I probably won't even get an interview. And my biggest piece of advice there is don't make that decision for them. Like there are some companies that may, have, particular person they're looking for, but when they interview you, you're the person they want to invest in. And, but if you automatically just take yourself out of the game before they even get a chance, you've automatically disqualified yourself from that job. So don't disqualify yourself. Let the company say no. Don't tell yourself no all the time. A next piece of advice before the interview is to research. Research the company, what they do, what they build. Research their tech stack, like what are the languages and things that they like and they do. And also research how their interview process works. Some companies have, as part of their technical interview, they'll do like a whiteboard. Some companies will do just, will do like an algorithm or like a case study. And so it's really important to kind of research what that company does, is looking for, and that really kind of help you narrow the field of what is that a company you even want to work for. But also it'll give you the tools to be successful when you go into the interview. It's a funny story. I was talking to, when I got asked to do this, I went to ask some of my original recruiters and said, hey, just give me some thoughts on what are y'all thinking about? Just like, you spend every day in the recruiting field, like what are y'all's thoughts? And one of their one point was like, to know the company that you're interviewing for. Nothing's worse than being in an interview and someone asks you like, why do you want to work for us? And you don't even know what the company does. So research is so key. Also, when you're submitting like your resume or you're filling out things, like tailor it to that company. So if that company is really big in Node, then if you are also good in Node, is to highlight that in your resume. Don't bury it down in there. So tailor your resume. Nowhere in the world does it say that you have to submit the same resume for every job. Like you can submit a resume that is specific to that job and highlights the things that highlight your best fit for that job. And one other thing too is before the interview is to network and connect. Connect with your recruiter. So if you're working with a recruiter with the company or working with a recruiter from like an agency, like connect them questions, use them as a resource for that. So this is a good person in your research space to ask, like, if you're coming on for an interview, to ask your recruiter, like, what's expected in the interview? What's it like? What do I wear? Those are really great questions to ask your recruiter. Also connect if you know of anybody at the company, or friends of friends, someone at the company. It's good to just connect with them and say, hey, I've got a couple questions about like, how do you like working there? What's a challenging thing about working there? What do you really what's your favorite thing about working there? And so just like having that network and connecting with people will help you learn more about what that company, like if that's a good fit, and also give you a good edge on like what to expect in the interview. And so during the interview, this is where it kind of gets, company to company. And so most companies, when you're going to hire with, for a tech job, you'll probably have some type of behavioral interview. You may have a couple of different tech interviews that might be more technical, just questions or discussions. There might be like a whiteboard or a case study or a code problem set. And so when we're talking about some of these tips, I really want to focus on like more of the technical bits. And so some of the things can also translate to some of the other, like a behavioral interview. But I really want to talk just specifically about the tech specific, whether it's a whiteboard or a code problem or a technical discussion. So the first thing is you're going into this technical interview, and let's say it's a whiteboard or like a code problem or a code problem set. And one of the big things you want to do is ask questions. Like one of the things that a lot of interviews look for is, are you validating your assumptions for what you're trying to solve? So if an interviewer says, hey, I want you to write me a function that reverses a string, and you just go to town, like you're missing some key things. Like you need to validate, like, am I returning a new string? Am I mutating a string? Like there are questions to ask to validate that you're getting what they're asking for. And it's also good to ask questions about edge cases. Maybe there's, am I assuming, do I need to handle edge cases? Do I need to write, do I need to have a test for this? So asking questions is a good thing, and really the first thing you should start doing when you get into a technical interview and they give you the problem set. I just ask those clarifying questions. And this next point, think out loud, is it's incredibly hard to do. I struggle so hard with this because it brings me back to like the nightmare scenarios back when I was in grade school or high school, and you're going through your math problems and they're like, we need you to show your work. I'm like, but I've got the answer. And they're like, well, show your work, because the teacher needs to know, like, see your learning path through that. And similar to that in this tech interview, one of the things as an interviewer, when I'm interviewing someone doing a tech thing and you're thinking about how you're solving the problem, like in your mind, you're not allowing me to see like your thought processes of solving that problem. And maybe you're taking the problem and breaking it down into bite-sized problems. Maybe you're, ruling out edge cases or whatever the case may be. Like trying, as awkward as it is to do sometimes, to think out loud your thought process. And this is an area where you can actually practice this, right? So if you're practicing for a whiteboard or something like that, to walk through writing out your solution and actually talking through it. And it's, again, it's awkward, but it's so helpful to the interviewer to see, okay, I'm thinking about this function and here's some of the areas that I'm considering, or here's what I really want to make sure I hit, those type of things. So thinking out loud is such a great thing for you, and it's great for the interviewer to see. Being honest is actually incredibly important, not only before you get to the interview, but during the interview. There's nothing worse than knowing someone doesn't know something and then watching them try and just force their way through it and trying to act like they know it. Most of the interviewers will purposely continue to push through points to get you to a point where you don't know something, to see how you react when you don't know something. So it's okay to be honest and say, that's the area I'm not quite sure on that approach. Let's talk about it. Like, what are your thoughts? And to, kind of ask the interviewer. So if you get to a question and they're like, you don't know it, like, it's completely okay to say, I don't know. And in some cases that might mean that job's not the best for you at this moment. Like there are still some areas to work on, but the worst is to go on and try and act like you know it when you don't, because most cases it does show. So to be honest when you're in those technical interviews. Also ask for feedback. Most interviewers, myself included, like if someone's asked me like, how can I do this better? More than happy to talk about that, or even during the problem solution phase, like thinking through, like, hey, is this an approach you would do? Does this make sense? And walking through that is really great. And also interview them. Like, so if you're in this, like, as you're finishing up the technical interview and you're walking through things, interview them, ask them questions. Is this a company you want to work for? So their technical interview can tell you a lot about how they themselves approach a coding environment and how they approach problems. So, kind of note those things and ask them questions and be thinking strategically of, do I want to work for them? Not, just, hey, take a chance on me. That they need to sell themselves to you as well. And then lastly, like after the interview, and I only got one point for here, but I think it's so crucial, is to follow up. Actually follow up with your recruiter or people that you were working with, even if it's just a simple email. It's like, hey, I really appreciated this. And if you can include examples like, hey, I appreciated my conversation with X about this topic. It's something so small, but I've seen it give huge impacts to people and how people how the company views you in that. So just a simple act of following up after your interview, especially if you stumbled or you asked for feedback, you're like, hey, I did this approach, but during our interview, we took a different approach. I've had someone that came back and said, I actually, went and researched that approach you were talking about, and I really like it. Here's why, and here's some of my learnings from it. And it was just really impressive to see someone that took that feedback, researched it, and came back and showed how they would apply it. And it was incredibly powerful for us as the kind of interviewing them, because I think it showed a lot on that person. So definitely following up with your recruiter and the people that you interviewed with. I got a couple additional resources here. I think that'll be interesting. We're going to try and put them in the chat or put them in the description of the video. And so we'll get connected to that here in a bit. And so make sure I'll have those links. But a couple of resources that go into a little bit more specific on the different parts of interview, how to prepare specifically for a technical interview, and some good long form content that has some really good areas that might also have some problem sets there. So that was a couple of broad bullet points, and I'm gonna close it back out here to stop sharing my screen while y'all are thinking of some questions. But I know that that was a broad take on some of those points, but I really want to, make sure to ask, answer some of the questions that y'all have. And I know, Morgan, I think you had some questions
yes.
that, that we've gotten submitted ahead of time.
Yes, so we can jump into those. Camera back on. So I'll go here first. So someone submitted, how can I make myself a viable option for employment without previous experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the biggest things that you can do, especially when you don't have experience, is you've got to demonstrate. You've got to give, the interviewer something to work with. So if you've got projects that you've done, code that you've written, it is much easier to, okay, yeah, you don't have experience, but I can see your code. It is much easier than for that company to say, okay, yeah, they don't have experience, but they can write code really well, or they've got this app that they've worked on. And so, like if you don't have, portfolio or code examples or projects that you worked on, definitely go out and find some that you can work on. Whether it's, hey, I want to build my friend's website, or I've got this app that I want to build that I'm really, interested in. That's actually how I got my first tech job, is because I've been doing stuff, I've been working in the field, or I've been, coding was always my hobby for years. And I built tons of apps, but I didn't have any official experience. And so when the company looked at me, they said, well, you have no experience as an engineer, but I was able to show, like, actually my experience is in kind of all my own projects, my own apps. And so they were able to kind of look at that and they're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And so they were able to, I was able to get the job because of the code and apps that I'd already written. So that's the biggest advice is have your own projects, have portfolio that, that have people can see your code.
Awesome. And I'll skip down because I think we have a question that kind of piggybacks off of that. Roughly how many projects ought to be in a newbie's portfolio? And that was a new question.
Yeah,
from Christine?
that's a good question. I mean, there's not really like a magic number. Definitely a few, right? And that's it's super generic. More than two, maybe, but not necessarily like more than five or something like that. So like having a few projects in there that can showcase your talent, right? And the one thing I'll say is having projects in there that are specific to you and like unique to you. And what I mean by that is if you have like, 5, 10 projects that are, like from a tutorial or something like that, like I would not count tutorial projects as projects for your portfolio. Right? I would try and find kind of new projects that you can have. Maybe they're a spin on some of the tutorial projects, or maybe it's a different area. But like, especially some of the more popular tutorial projects, like that doesn't make you stand out because everyone else knows that it's a tutorial project and it doesn't showcase your code ability. So I would say definitely a few, two or more. Okay, give me just a second. My earpods just decided to die. Okay.
That might have been me. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I'm jumping back to one of our submitted questions. Do you have thoughts on the current market, especially in South Carolina/Columbia?
Yeah, so the current market is it's a tough one to say, right? Like there's a lot of things in there. I mean, I would say there's a lot of opportunity right now across the market. Where that's challenging is it's tough to get that first job, right? If you get 6 months experience to a year, then your recruiting calls are all day, every day. So there is a lot of opportunity for there's a lot of opportunity for jobs past that, first 6 months to a year or whatever. But that first job is a little bit more challenging. So those jobs are there. They're just a little bit harder to get. So that's why I think it's really important to kind of research those companies to see, one, who's hiring, but who's also willing to invest in you and help grow you, especially if you're someone newer to the industry.
Thank you. Let's see here. Another submitted question. What would you say is the bare minimum educational requirement? And that's probably so broad because it's going to depend on the job, but bare minimum educational requirement. Oh, I think we may have lost you, Paul. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Okay. Am I back now?
You are back now, yes.
I forgot to check my AirPods right before I got to this, and I've been on meetings all day, and they didn't.
No worries.
So the question was minimal level of education.
Yes.
Definitely, it is depending on that company. Some of the bigger companies still kind of have like an older practice of like you've got to have this minimal degree level, before you even get considered. I would say more and more companies now are looking more at experience and basically can you write code versus thinking about the education requirement. So from my experience, when I'm looking to hire someone, the education level is probably the last thing I look at when I look at their resume. I've probably looked more in depth into their code and their projects and their experience, really without weighing in education. So for a lot of companies, you don't have to have any kind of college work to do that. They really just care about, can you code? Can you
do these, you have these technical skills. So that's why it's really important, like in the research phase, to kind of, think through that and kind of know, going into it.
Awesome. Let's see. How do you share back-end projects with potential employers, especially recruiters? They're usually not that flashy, and some of the technical content can be rather dry. And that was from Roy. Hi, Roy.
Yeah, that's a good question. And man, I feel you on that. Sometimes it's challenging because I get really excited about some back-end code, especially like, like a particular API structure or something like that. And you just get into it like, oh man, this is so epic. Like when it goes here, it hits this endpoint and then it does all these different jobs and all that stuff, but you don't see any of that. So I think it's really important, one, to try and boil down like the value of that project, one, especially at the recruiter level. So, because, if you can say, hey, I built this project, one, here's what I learned. Two, here's what value I think it adds, right? So like, let's say you built an API that provides some data to a lot of people, right? Like it provided some really cool data to all these people. That's a huge value add to the community. One of the big things I was learning or going after was to look at RESTful architecture. And so that in itself is a great thing to signal to the recruiter, like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I can see, I see some of the technologies you use, some of the things you learned. And then once you get to the technical side, you can kind of dive into your source code. And so from a technical standpoint, if you're showing off that backend product, it's really helpful for, good documentation to kind of show that off as well. But, if you can nail down at least from, if you're explaining it broadly, is what's the value that this solves or the problem that it solves, and what did you learn from it?
Awesome. And I'll keep going with Roy, who said, sounds like whiteboard interviews favor extroverts. And so thinking about wanting to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and this is an interesting area because again, think back to my disclaimer, like all companies are so different on this, but it's one of those things where these whiteboard interviews, like they favor, it's easier for someone that maybe is more comfortable just thinking out loud or talking with people to kind of show that out. But it's definitely something that's doable with practice, right? So if you're not as comfortable, then you may want to spend a little bit extra time, kind of thinking through that so that you can showcase, your skills, from that. Because one of the things for me as an interviewer, the challenge is I've got to be able to see like how you're solving those problems, right? Like, so if you write a function or you get to the answer of this problem set and I have no idea how you've done that, then like I don't know if it's just something that you've memorized how to get there or if you were thinking through the problem, kind of talking through it. So this is definitely one of the areas that I recommend like practicing, just getting comfortable and talking through it, because it's definitely challenging and it's awkward. It's awkward for me all the time. Like when I did a technical interview, like, and having to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. My mind goes in like 5 places when I'm thinking something. And so to verbalize where my mind's going was such a challenge. And so like, but practicing that really helps. And I know it's a little bit of the awkward and challenge, but it's definitely something to try and focus on and get done.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into some more of our submitted questions, but please feel free to throw them in the chat, throw additional questions in the chat as they come up. Let's see. Is it better to have a wide range of more basic projects using different languages, stacks in your portfolio, or a single advanced project using one stack?
Good question. I think it depends on the company the position that you're going after. So if you're trying to apply for a position that has, we need you to do everything, then maybe it's helpful to show projects like, hey, where I've got competency in multiple areas. But if you're applying to a position that's very specialized, or in particular to one part of the stack, then I think it's more powerful to see more advanced code on that. versus broad. So like take for example, if you're applying for a specific front end position, it's maybe helpful to see a couple of basic projects across front end, back end, and different parts of the stack. But I think it's more powerful to see kind of how deep your knowledge goes in that front end, since that's kind of what I'm evaluating and looking at you for.
Awesome. This is a good one. What's the best thing to say when you don't know the answer to a tech question?
So honestly, the best thing for you to say is that you don't know. And I think there's variations to that answer that all convey the same thing. You can say I'm not familiar with that, or that's not quite sure. Let's talk about it, or that's interesting. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. Like there's ways to say that, but if you don't know, it's like you don't know. One area to like kind of pivot from that is, either I don't know and kind of write it down, like that's a good area to study. Is there some recommended approaches or places I should look? Or, depending on the context, you can ask for feedback on like, well, I'm not sure about that. Like, can we talk about it? Like, what are your thoughts on it? But it's the wrong answer is to try and fake it till you make it kind of a thing in this scenario. It usually does not work. I've seen many times I'll ask a question and it is very clear that they're not sure of the answer, or they don't know the answer flat out. And it's challenging to walk through, and it does not help you in the interview. In fact, it's actually a positive to see someone that says, yeah, I'm not sure of that, and to see their passion to learn that, or to see, I don't know, this is how I would go about learning. And for me as an interviewer, it says, okay, I'm definitely going to give you problems that we don't know the answer to, because that's kind of what I'm paying for. Is if I give you a problem that we don't know the answer for and you don't know the answer for, I need to know that you can find the answer. And so if you don't know and you know of a way, like this is kind of how I would start to think about that. Like that's also a really good space to be in.
Awesome. Okay. And I think that kind of sums up the meat and potatoes of our webinar here. But number one tip to stand out in a crowd of applicants. There's 150 people applying. How do I stand out?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's challenging, right? I think one of the things that I've heard from multiple recruiters is your cover letter is a dying art. And like having especially for those making a career shift, is, the cover letter kind of speaking to like why you're interested in the position, why this job is like why you think you're a good fit, like what you're hoping to gain. That's one way to help you stand out, right? Is having a cover letter that speaks well to that. Same as to, when you're applying and you're highlight, like make sure you highlight your resume and your application to those jobs. So let's say you're competent in maybe Node and PHP and a couple other technologies, but the job specifically says we're looking for someone in Node. Then make sure your resume highlights not only that you know Node, but to the level that you know it. Maybe different frameworks in Node or different technologies within Node. So that company is, if they're definitely looking for a Node developer, you can make sure your resume screams, I'm a Node developer. Even though you've got some other talents in other places, it's super helpful, to help you stand out in those things. And also your portfolio and your website. So I typically always will look at someone's website if they've got one. And so that's a nice way too to showcase other things about you, projects, things you're interested in. And one piece of advice too, as kind of sidebar on your personal websites, if you're going to have that as a personal website and you're applying for an engineering job, make sure the website itself is pretty polished on the engineering side. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone applying for like a engineer job and then their website is got some rough edges to it. Like your website is a perfect place to showcase, hey, this is something I'm putting out to the public. It is my face as an engineer, like that. You should make sure that's kind of polished up. So especially like if I open up the console on your website and I just get massive errors, maybe it's helpful to like work through and, solve some of those errors before, recruiters and other engineers are looking at it.
Fantastic. Another good one. How much is memorization and how much is Googling on the job?
I think that's the fun secret of engineering is like your ability to Google is actually a marketable skill. And so like the quicker you learn how to Google well, I think helps you advance further. And it's definitely a learned skill, right? On how to Google something, what I'm typing into Google. But you will always be in a position of needing to find an answer to something, right? Like there's some that's helpful to memorize for efficiency and speed of use. But at the end of the day, a lot of this tech changes so quickly that it's kind of impossible to continue to memorize every new thing that comes up. So like, I think the better habit is how do you learn and absorb new information and learn new things? If you can hone in on that skill is so incredibly valuable, especially in the tech field. The example I always love to give people is, you think of technologies really popular in the front end right now, like React or Vue or Angular. A lot of these technologies did not exist more than 6, 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, right? So less than a decade ago, these technologies were not in existence, and now they are the backbone on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of product out there. And if you are in this position where like I've learned everything and I'm done, and you don't know how to learn well, like you are quickly left behind. So I would definitely get into the habit of like, how do I learn new things, and how do I, when I find something I don't know, like what's my good quick way to get to it, right? Whether it's going to Stack Overflow, whether it's a solid a solid Google search, or maybe have a couple sites. There's a couple sites that ping your technology stack that are really good. If you're in the JavaScript or Node world, like knowing the MDM docs, it's really good. Just a good resource to be able to flow through them. And I don't memorize every function that I use in Node. One, because I can find it in the docs within seconds and kind of see everything. And two, like it helps me to just keep that skill fresh of like, I don't know how to do this. Let's see what the docs say. Okay, that's great.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that and for answering all of those questions. I think we got through a good bit of them. It looks like on the chat and definitely what we submitted. So as we are putting out the last call for questions, which I'm doing now, would love to kind of hear your final thoughts, parting words, kind of sum it all up. Help us leave feeling empowered to go take on the interview and do really well.
Yeah. So I mean, as I kind of think of like, it was interesting when I was preparing for this and thinking about like, what do I say to people that are, wanting to ace these interviews, and and I was kind of thinking of my own journey, and I went back and asked like my recruiters originally for the first recruiter I worked with. And, the biggest things that seem to be timeless is, we're looking for people that can problem solve, right? At the end of the day, like your ability to problem solve is what gets you far. Also looking for people with passion. And so if you're not excited about the things that you're learning, that tends to show in the interview. So when you're in the interview, like make sure your passion for what you're learning and the industry you want to get into comes through. Whether that's how you learn new things, whether that's how you keep fresh on your chosen field, that stuff carries you far in interviews. And the last thing I would say too is kind of going back to that first point, like don't disqualify yourself. And like, and this is a really challenging point for especially someone that's maybe doing a career shift or newer to the industry. Like imposter syndrome is real, and it's a challenging thing. And sometimes that creeps in an interview, and it's like, yeah, I've learned these things, but I'm not an engineer, or that's not a job for me. This is just a hobby, or this is just something fun. I probably couldn't do that. Like, don't be the one saying no to a job. I think it's healthy to prepare yourself that, there's a good chance there are a lot of jobs that'll say, hey, now's not the right time. It's not what we're looking for at the time. Like, and that's okay, right? You're going to get that. But don't be the one yourself doing that, right? Don't be the one saying, like, automatically taking yourself out of the running. It kind of stops you before you even get started, and you continue, like, it doesn't help you get into a good mind space for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for taking time out of your day, out of your evening to share this with us, and for all the preparation that you did for the interview as well. I definitely feel like there are tons of tips and tricks in this webinar that we can share out and that people can take from to help us better prepare. So thank you again. I know you left your contact info or had your contact info at the beginning of the slide, but when we share this out, which we'll do again, we'll share that as well. So hopefully you're okay with someone popping in and asking you a quick question about how to prepare. But thank you for being here with us tonight. And then everyone who is hanging out with us, if you have a question about SC codes, a question about our platform, if you're looking to volunteer, anything like that, I'm happy to stay on just a little bit with you and answer those questions as well. Please join me in a virtual applause for Paul, and we will hope to see you back here again to share some more knowledge with us.
My pleasure. Yeah, anytime.
Thanks so much, and thank you all for joining us again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.